Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Gods by Terry Pratchett, Part 14. The librarian swung on. It was slow progress, because there were things he wasn't keen on meeting. Creatures evolved to fill every niche in the environment, and some of those in the dusty immensity of L-space were best avoided. They were much more unusual than ordinary, unusual creatures. Usually, he could forewarn himself by keeping a careful eye on the kickstool crabs that grazed harmlessly on the dust. When they were spooked, it was time to hide. Several times he had to flatten himself against the shelves as a thesaurus thundered by. He waited patiently as a herd of critters crawled past, grazing on the contents of the choicier books and leaving behind them piles of small, slim volumes of literary criticism. And there were other things which he hurried away from and tried not to look hard at. And you had to avoid cliches at all costs. He finished the last of his peanuts atop a stepladder, which was browsing mindlessly off the high shelves. The territory definitely had a familiar feel, or at least he got the feeling that it would eventually be familiar. Time had a different meaning in L space. There were shelves whose outline he felt he knew. The book titles, while still unreadable, held a tantalizing hint of legibility. Even the musty air had a smell he thought he recognized. He shambled quickly along a side passage, turned the corner, and, with only the slightest twinge of disorientation, shuffled into that set of dimensions that people, because they don't know any better, think of as normal. He just felt extremely hot, and his fur stood straight out from his body as temporal energy gradually discharged. He was in the dark. He extended one arm and explored the spines of the books by his side. Now he knew where he was. He was home. He was home a week ago. It was essential that he didn't leave footprints, but that wasn't a problem. He shinned up the side of the nearest bookcase and, under the starlight of the dome, hurried onwards. Lupine once glared up, red-eyed, from the heap of paperwork on his desk. No one in the city knew anything about coronations. He'd had to make it up as he went along. There should be plenty of things to wave. He knew that. "Yes?" he said abruptly. There's a Captain Vimes to see you," said the flunky. "Vimes of the what?" "Yes, sir. Says it's of the utmost importance." Once looked down his list of other things that were also of the utmost importance. Crowning the king, for one thing. The high priests of 53 religions were all claiming the honor. It was going to be a scrum. And then there were the crown jewels. Or rather, there weren't the crown jewels. Somewhere in the preceding generations, the crown jewels had disappeared. A jeweler in the street of cunning artificers was doing the best he could in the time with gilt and glass.
Gilt.
Gilt, G-I-L-T, covered thinly with gold leaf or gold paint. Gilt. Vimes could wait. "Tell him to come back another day," said Once. "Good of you to see us," said Vimes, appearing in the doorway. Once glared at him. "Since you're here," he said. Vimes dropped his helmet on Once's desk in what the secretary thought was an offensive manner and sat down. "Take a seat," said Once. "Have you had breakfast yet?" said Vimes. "Now really," Once began. "Don't worry," said Vimes cheerfully. "Constable Carrot will go and see what's in the kitchens. This chap will show him the way." When they had gone, Once leaned across the drifts of paperwork. "There had better," he said, "be a very good reason for—" "The dragon is back," said Vimes. Once stared at him for a while. Vimes stared back. Once's senses came back from whatever corners they'd bounced into. "You've been drinking, haven't you?" he said. "No, the dragon is back." "Now look," Once began. "I saw it," said Vimes flatly. "A dragon? You're sure?" Vimes leaned across the desk. "No, I could be bloody mistaken," he shouted. "It may have been something else with sodding great big claws, huge leathery wings, and hot, fiery breath. There must be masses of things like that." "But we all saw it killed," said Once. "I don't know what we saw," said Vimes, "but I know what I saw." He leaned back, shaking. He was suddenly feeling extremely tired. "Anyway," he said in a more normal voice, "it's flamed a house in Bitwash Street, just like the other ones." "Any of them get out?" Vimes put his head in his hands. He wondered how long it was since he'd last had any sleep. Proper sleep. The sort with sheets or food, come to that. Was it last night or the night before? Had he ever, come to think of it, ever slept at all in all his life? It didn't seem like it. The arms of Morpheus had rolled up their sleeves and were giving the back of his brain a right pummeling. But bits were fighting back. "Any of them get—" "Any of who?" he said. "The people in the house, of course," said Once. "I assume there were people in it. At night, I mean." Oh, yes. It wasn't like a normal house. I think it was some sort of secret society thing," Vimes managed. Something was clicking in his mind, but he was too tired to examine it. "Magic, you mean?" "Dunno," said Vimes. "Could be. Guys in robes." "He's going to tell me I've been overdoing it," he said. "He'll be right, too." "Look," said Once kindly. "People who mess around with magic and don't know how to control it, well, they can blow themselves up and blow themselves up. And you've had a busy few days," said Once soothingly. "If I'd been knocked down and almost burned alive by a dragon, I expect I'd be seeing them all the time." Vimes stared at him with his mouth open. He couldn't think of anything to say. Whatever stretched and knotted elastic had been driving him along these last few days had gone entirely limp. You don't think you've been overdoing it, do you? Said Once. Ah, thought Vimes. Jolly good. He slumped forward. The librarian leaned cautiously over the top of the bookcase and unfolded an arm into the darkness. There it was, his thick fingernails grasping the spine of the book, pulled it gently from its shelf and hoisted it up. He raised the lantern carefully. No doubt about it. The Summoning of Dragons, single copy, first edition, slightly foxed and extremely dragoned. He set the lamp down beside him and began to read the first page. Said Vimes, waking up. Brung you a nice cup of tea, Captain, said Sergeant Cullen. And a figgin'. Vimes looked at him blankly. You've been asleep, said Sergeant Cullen helpfully. You was spark out when Carrot brought you back. Vimes looked around at the now familiar surroundings of the yard. Oh, he said. Me and Nobby have been doing some detectoring, said Colin. You know that house that got melted? Well, no one lives there. It's just rooms that get hired out. So we found out who hires them. There's a caretaker who goes along every night to put the chairs away and lock up. He wasn't half creating about it being burned down. You know what caretakers are like. He stood back, waiting for the applause. Well done, said Vimes dutifully, dunking the figgin into the tea. There's 3 societies use it, said Colin. He extracted his notebook. To wit, viz. the Ankh-Morpork Fine Art Appreciation Society, the Morpork Folk Dance and Song Club, and the Elucidated Brethren of the Ebon Knight. Why, said Vimes. Well, you know, fine art. It's just men painting pictures of young women in the nid. They're all together, explained Colin, the connoisseur. The caretaker told me. Some of them don't even have any paint on their brushes, you know. Shameful. There must be a million stories in the naked city, thought Vimes. So why do I always have to listen to ones like these? When do they meet? He said. Mondays, 7:30. Admission 10 pence, said Colin promptly. As for the folk dance people, well, no problem there. You know you always wondered what Corporal Nubbs does on his evenings off. Colin's face split into a watermelon grin. No, said Vimes incredulously. Not Nobby. Yep, said Colin, delighted at the result. What, jumping about with belts on and waving his hanky in the air? He says it is important to preserve old folk ways, said Colin. Nobby? Mr. Steel toe caps in the groin? I was just checking the door handle and it opened all by itself. Yeah, funny old world, ain't it? He was very bashful about it. Good grief, said Vimes. It just goes to show you never can tell, said Colin. Anyway, the caretaker said the elucidated brethren always leave the place in a mess. Scuffed chalk marks on the floor, he said, and they never put the chairs back properly or wash out the tea urn. They've been meeting a lot lately, he said. The nudie women painters had to meet somewhere else last week. What did you do with our suspect? Said Vimes. Him? Oh, he done a runner, Captain, said the sergeant, looking embarrassed. Why? He didn't look in any shape to run anywhere. Well, when we got back here, we sat him down by the fire and wrapped him up because he kept on shivering, said Sergeant Cullen as Vimes buckled his armor on. I hope you didn't eat his pizzas. Errol ate 'em. It's the cheese, see? It goes all... Go on. Well, said Cullen awkwardly. He kept on shivering, sort of thing, and groaning on about dragons and that. We felt sorry for him, to tell the truth, and then he jumps up and runs out of the door for no reason at all. Vimes glanced at the sergeant's big, open, dishonest face. No reason? He prompted. Well, we decided to have a bite, so I sent Nobby out to the baker's, see, and, well, we thought the prisoner ought to have something to eat. Yes, said Vimes encouragingly. Well, when Nobby asked him if he wanted his figgin toasted, he just gave a scream and ran off. Just that, said Vimes. You didn't threaten him in any way? Straight up, Captain. Bit of a mystery, if you ask me. He kept going on about someone called Supreme Grandmaster. Vimes glanced out of the window. Grey fog lagged the world with dim light. What time is it? He said. 5 o'clock, sir. Right. Well, before it gets dark. Colin gave a cough. In the morning, sir. This is tomorrow, sir. You let me sleep all day? Didn't have the heart to wake you up, sir. No dragon activity, if that's what you're thinking. Dead quiet all round, in fact. Vimes glared at him and threw the window open. The fog rolled in a slow, yellow-edged waterfall. We reckon it must have flown away, said Colin's voice behind him. Vimes stared up into the heavy rolling clouds. Hope it clears up for the coronation, Colin went on in a worried voice. You all right, sir? It hasn't flown away, Vimes thought. Why should it fly away? We can't hurt it, and it's got everything it wants right here. It's up there somewhere. You all right, sir? Colin repeated. It's got to be up high somewhere. In the fog, there's all kinds of towers and things. What time's the coronation, Sergeant? He said. Noon, sir, and Mr. Wance has sent a message about how you're to be in your best armor among all the civic leaders, sir. Oh, has he? And Sergeant Hummock and the day squad will be lining the route, sir. With what? Said Vimes vaguely, watching the skies. Sorry, sir? Vimes squinted upwards to get a better view of the roof. He said. I said they'll be lining the route, sir, said Sergeant Cullen. It's up there, Sergeant, said Vimes. I can practically smell it. Yes, sir, said Colin obediently. It's deciding what to do next. Yes, sir? They're not unintelligent, you know. They just don't think like us. Yes, sir. So be damned to any lining of the route. I want you three up on the roofs. Understand? Yes, sir. What? Up on the roofs. Up high. When it makes its move. When it makes its move, I want us to be the first to know. Colin tried to indicate by his expression that he didn't. Do you think that's a good idea, sir? He ventured. Vimes gave him a blank look. Yes, Sergeant, I do. It was one of mine, he said coldly. Now go and see Toyle. When he was left to himself, Vimes washed and shaved in cold water, and then rummaged in his campaign chest until he unearthed his ceremonial breastplate and red cloak. Well, the cloak had been red once, and still was here and there, although most of it resembled a small net used very successfully for catching moths. There was also a helmet, defiantly without plumes, for which the molecule thick gold leaf had long ago peeled. He'd started saving up for a new cloak once. Whatever had happened to that money? There was no one in the guardroom. Errol lay in the wreckage of the fourth fruit box Nobby had scrounged for him. The rest had all been eaten, or had dissolved. In the warm silence, the everlasting rumble of his stomach sounded especially loud. Occasionally he whimpered. "What's up with you, boy?" he said. The door creaked open. Carrot came in, saw Vimes hunkered down by the ravaged box, and saluted. "We're a bit worried about him, Captain," he volunteered. "He hasn't eaten his coal, just lies there twitching and whining all the time. You don't think something's wrong with him, do you?" "Possibly," said Vimes. "But having something wrong with them is quite normal for a dragon. They always get over it, one way or another." Errol gave him a mournful look and closed his eyes again. Vimes pulled his scrap of blanket over him. There was a squeak. He fished around beside the dragon's shivering body, pulled out a small rubber hippo, stared at it in surprise, and then gave it one or two experimental squeezes. "I thought it would be something for him to play with," said Carrot, slightly shamefaced. "You bought him a little toy?" "Yes, sir." "What a kind thought." Vimes hoped Carrot hadn't noticed the fluffy ball tucked into the back of the box. It had been quite expensive. He left the two of them and stepped into the outside world. There was even more bunting now. People were beginning to line the main streets. Even though there were hours to wait, it was still very depressing. He felt an appetite for once, one that it'd take more than a drink or two to satisfy. He strolled along for breakfast at Hargas' House of Ribs, the habit of years, and got another unpleasant surprise. Normally, the only decoration in there was on Sham Hargas' vest, and the food was good solid stuff for a cold morning. All calories and fat and protein, and maybe a vitamin crying softly because it was all alone. Now, laboriously made paper streamers crisscrossed the room, and he was confronted with a crayoned menu in which the words Coronation and Royale figured somewhere on every crooked line. Vimes pointed warily at the top of the menu. "What's this?" he said. Harga peered at it. They were alone in the grease-walled cafe. "It says, by Royal Appointmente, Captain," he said proudly. "What's it mean?" Harga scratched his head with a ladle. "What it means is," he said, "if the king comes in here, he'll like it." "Have you got anything that isn't too aristocratic for me to eat then?" said Vimes sourly, and settled for a slice of plebeian fried bread and a proletarian steak cooked so rare you could still hear it bray. Vimes ate it at the counter. A vague scrapping noise disturbed his thoughts. "What are you doing?" he said. Harga looked up guiltily from his work behind the counter. "Nothing, Captain," he said. He tried to hide the evidence behind him when Vimes glared over the knife-chewed woodwork. "Come on, Sham, you can show me." Harga's beefy hands came reluctantly reluctantly into view. "I was only scraping the old fat out of the pan," he mumbled. "I see. And how long have we known each other, Sham?" said Vimes with terrible kindness. "Years, Captain," said Harger. "You've been coming in here nearly every day, reg'lar. One of my best customers." Vimes leaned over the counter until his nose was level with the squashy pink thing in the middle of Hargas's face. "And in all that time, have you ever changed the fat?" he demanded. Harger tried to back away. "Well, it's been like a friend to me, that old fat," said Vimes. "There's little black bits in there I've grown to know and love. It's a meal in itself. And you've cleaned out the coffee jug, haven't you? I can tell. This is love in a canoe coffee if ever I tasted it. The other stuff had flavor." "Well, I thought it was time." "Why?" Harger let the pan fall from his pudgy fingers. "Well, I thought if the king should happen to come in." "But, Captain!" Vimes's accusing finger buried itself up to the second joint in Hargus's expansive vest. "You don't even know the wretched fellow's name!" he shouted. Harger rallied. "I do, Captain," he stuttered. "Course I do. Seen it on the decorations and everything. He's called Rex Vivat." Very gently, shaking his head in despair, crying in his heart for the essential servility of mankind, Vimes let him go. In another time and place, the librarian finished reading. He'd reached the end of the text, not the end of the book. There was plenty more book. It had been scorched beyond the point of legibility, though. Not that the last few unburned pages were very easy to read. The author's hand had been shaking. He'd been writing fast, and he'd blotted a lot. But the librarian had wrestled with many a terrifying text in some of the worst books ever bound. Words that tried to read you as you read them. Words that writhed on the page. At least these weren't words like that. These were just the words of a man frightened for his life. A man writing a dreadful warning. It was a page a little back from the burned section that drew the librarian's eye. He sat and stared at it for some time. Then he stared at the darkness. It was his darkness. He was asleep out there somewhere. Somewhere out there, a thief was heading for this place to steal this book. And then someone would read this book, read these words, and do it anyway. His hands itched. All he had to do was hide the book, or drop onto the thief's head and unscrew it by the ears. He stared into the darkness again. But that would be interfering with the course of history. Horrible things could happen. The librarian knew all about this sort of thing. It was part of what you had to know before you were allowed into L space. He'd seen pictures in ancient books. Time could bifurcate, like a pair of trousers.
Bifurcate.
Bifurcate, divide into two branches or forks. Time could bifurcate like a pair of trousers. You could end up in the wrong leg, living a life that was actually happening in the other leg, talking to people who weren't in your leg, walking into walls that weren't there anymore. Life could be horrible in the wrong trouser of time. Besides, it was against library rules. The assembled librarians of time and space would certainly have something to say about it if he started to tinker with causality. He closed the book carefully and tucked it back into the shelf. Then he swung gently from bookcase to bookcase until he reached the doorway. For a moment he stopped and looked down at his own sleeping body. Perhaps he wondered briefly whether to wake himself up, have a little chat, tell himself that he had friends and not to worry. If so, he must have decided against it. You could get yourself into a lot of trouble that way. Instead, he slipped out of the door and lurked in the shadows and followed the hooded thief when it came out clutching the book, and waited near the dread portal in the rain until the elucidated brethren had met and, when the last one left, followed him to his home and murmured to himself in anthropod surprise, and then ran back to his library and the treacherous pathways of L space. By mid-morning, the streets were packed. Vimes had docked Nobby a day's salary for waving a flag, and an air of barbed gloom settled over the yard, like a big black cloud with occasional flashes of lightning in it. "Get up in a high place," muttered Nobby. "That's all very well to say."
"I was looking forward to lining the streets," said Colin. "I'd have got a good view."
"You were going on about privilege and the rights of man the other night," said Nobby accusingly.
Well, one of the privileges and rights of this man is getting a good view," said the sergeant. "That's all I'm saying."
"I've never seen the captain in such a filthy temper," said Nobby. "I liked it better when he was on the drink. I reckon he's—" "You know, I think Errol is really ill," said Carrot. They turned towards the fruit basket. "He's very hot, and his skin looks all shiny."
"What's the right temperature for a dragon?" said Colin.
"Yeah, how do you take it?" said Nobby. "I think we ought to ask Lady Ramkin to have a look at him," said Carrot. "She knows about these things."
"No, she'll be getting ready for the coronation. We shouldn't go disturbing her," said Colin. He stretched out his hand to Errol's quivering flanks. "I used to have a dog that's... Argh! That's not hot, that's boiling."
"I've offered him lots of water and he just won't touch it. What are you doing with that kettle, Nobby?" Nobby looked innocent. "Well, I thought we might as well make a cup of tea before we go out. It's a shame to waste."
"Take it off him!"
Noon came. The fog didn't lift, but it did thin a bit, to allow a pale yellow haze where the sun should have been. Although the passage of years had turned the post of captain of the watch into something rather shabby, it still meant that Vimes was entitled to a seat at official occasions. The pecking order had moved it, though, so that now he was in the lowest tier on the rickety bleachers between the master of the Fellowship of Beggars and the head of Teachers' Guild. And the head of the Teachers' Guild. He didn't mind that. Anything was better than the top row among the assassins, thieves, merchants, and all the other things that had floated to the top of society. He never knew what to talk about. Anyway, the teacher was restful company since he didn't do much but clench and unclench his hands occasionally and whimper. "Something wrong with your neck, Captain?" said the chief beggar politely as they waited for the coaches. "What?" said Vimes distractedly. "You keep on staring upwards," said the beggar. Oh, no, nothing wrong," said Vimes. The beggar wrapped his velvet cloak around him. "You couldn't by any chance spare," he paused, calculating a sum in accordance with his station, "about $300 for a 12-course civic banquet, could you?" "No." Fair enough, said the chief beggar amiably. He sighed. It wasn't a rewarding job being chief beggar. It was the differentials that did for you. Low-grade beggars made a reasonable enough living on pennies. But people tended to look the other way when you asked them for a 16-bedroom mansion for the night. Vimes resumed his study of the sky. Up on the dais, the high priest of blind Io, who last night by dint of elaborate ecumenical argument ecumenical, representing a number of different Christian churches. Upon the dais, the high priest of blind Io, who, last night, by dint of elaborate ecumenical argument, and eventually by a club with nails in it, had won the right to crown the king, fussed over his preparations. By the small, portable, sacrificial altar, a tethered billy goat was peacefully chewing the cud and possibly thinking, in goat, "What a lucky billy goat I am, to be given such a good view of the proceedings. This is going to be something to tell the kids." Vimes scanned the diffused outlines of the nearest buildings. A distant cheering suggested that the ceremonial procession was on its way. There was a scuffle of activity around the dais as Lupine once chived a scramble of servants who rolled a purple carpet down the steps.
Chivied.
Chivvy. Tell someone repeatedly to do something. There was a scuffle of activity around the dais as Lupine once chivied a scramble of servants who rolled a purple carpet down the steps. Across the square, amongst the ranks of Ankh-Morpork's faded aristocracy, Lady Ramkin's face tilted upwards. Around the throne, which had been hastily created out of wood and gold foil, a number of lesser priests, some of them with slight head wounds, shuffled into position. Vimes shifted in his seat, aware of the sound of his own heartbeat, and glared at the haze over the river, and saw the wings.